We're watching live pictures in Washington where Donald Trump's plane has just arrived at Reagan National Airport. Indictment number 3, Donald Trump due in court in Washington in the next hour, where the former president will be formally arrested on 4 criminal charges for his attempts to subvert the 2020 presidential election. Here is Donald Trump making his way from the plane at Reagan National Airport. The motorcade is in place. The Secret Service are downtown awaiting the former president's arrival. It is a truly historic arraignment. We will be live tonight in Washington throughout. We'll bring you all the reaction with expert analysis this evening from both sides of the argument as President Trump is indicted for the 3rd time. So there you see Donald Trump just getting into the motorcade. We're watching pool pictures from Reagan National Airport. It's not a very long journey from Reagan National Airport. It's about a 10-minute ride. He's due there at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Security, as you would expect, extremely tight around the airport and on that journey downtown. I was telling you that security is very tight. In fact, there was a Secret Service sweep of the courthouse last night. Strangely, these pictures that we're watching all very familiar now, because it looks something like this when he first appeared for that first indictment in Manhattan. And in fact, he is using these political appearances in court for political capital. You will see tonight perhaps a camera that will follow him on these journeys. It is all carefully documented. It's relayed on the campaign videos. It's now part of the broader fundraising effort, which is, of course, needed. He's already spent $40 million on his legal fees, and none of these cases have yet come to court. So let's go to Carl Nasman, who is in Washington for us this evening outside that courthouse. And we should just talk a little bit about the geography, Carl, because you're actually standing outside the courthouse, very close to the western entrance to Capitol Hill, where, of course, all these events unfolded on January 6th.
Yeah, of course, you would know very well exactly where we are. We are in front of that courthouse here, which has seen actually many other January 6 cases. Just steps away, probably less than a mile away, is the Capitol building itself. We can see it from where we're standing, and that is, of course, where those events played out on the date, January 6th, the riots and that insurrection, as it's called. And many of this case that the former president is now facing, many of those charges are directly related to the events that led up to that date. He's facing 4 criminal charges. We're expecting him now to arrive very shortly. He's gotten off the plane, getting into his motorcade. It looks like they're driving away now. They'll be headed here. We're expecting that court appearance to begin around 4 o'clock. The former president should arrive ahead of that. And as you were mentioning, a lot of this now becoming, although it is historic, becoming routine. We've seen this now a couple of times before, not only in New York, but also in Miami and the state of Florida. And now we'll be seeing it again here in Washington, D.C., in the nation's capital, just steps away from the Capitol building. He'll be processed. He'll be read aloud those 4 charges. We are expecting, of course, that Donald Trump will then plead not guilty. We'll have some other procedural methods that will take place. It'll last 30 minutes to an hour, and then we do expect the former president to make his way back to the airport, get back on that plane, and go ahead and go right back to New Jersey.
He could have joined this virtually, Carl, but he's taken, as we say, a political decision to attend this in person. Do we know whether he is likely to make a statement today after the hearing?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that he was given the option by the court itself to appear virtually. We assume some sort of video conference. Instead, he's on his way here. And as we've seen in the past, the president does like to take advantage of these opportunities to essentially make it part of his campaign. Of course, he's the front runner right now for the 2024 Republican nomination. So this is very much intertwined with that campaign. We saw before in Florida, a long drive from the courthouse there to a famous Cuban cafe or restaurant where he met up with his supporters. He even had some of them sing happy birthday to him. It was the day before his birthday. We're not sure. We haven't heard any confirmation yet today about whether he'll make any kind of speech. We're not expecting anything before the court appearance. It's possible we hear something later, but it would be very in line with what we've seen in the past. The former president, of course, making his legal issues very much political as well, making it part of his campaign. He's been fundraising off of his legal issues. He's already started to do that for this indictment as well. So we are expecting at least some sort of statement. We could get that later on today. We're not exactly sure what or where that will be.
Carl, thank you very much. Stay there because we will come back to you as events proceed this evening. You're looking at the live pictures there in the right-hand box of the motorcade making its way downtown from the Reagan National Airport. Let's talk about the indictment because it describes a breathtakingly broad campaign that Donald Trump encouraged in 2020 in a desperate and futile attempt to cling to power. In service of that goal, the special prosecutor alleges in 45 pages of this indictment that the former president enlisted 6 co-conspirators to spread lies and disinformation, first to pressure the state legislatures, then Congress, and then the Vice President Mike Pence, culminating in the appalling events that we witnessed on January the 6th. So let me introduce you to our panel this evening. We've got Mark Williams, who is a Republican strategist, Ankush Kadore, who is a former federal prosecutor, and also with us Alex Holder, who made a documentary about Donald Trump and his family in the weeks after the 2020 election, and his film was subpoenaed by the January 6th committee. We'll talk about that in the course of the evening. But let me start with you, Ankush, if I could, because the Republicans again today have accused Joe Biden and Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, of, quote, weaponizing the Justice Department to bring this case. Is that accurate in your view? Because it's taken 3.5 years to get to this position, and it took them until November last year to appoint a special counsel.
Yeah, I don't think it's accurate. In fact, I followed this closely. I reported out a profile for Merrick Garland earlier this year. And I don't think that they really wanted to do this per se. What I mean by that is that when Merrick Garland entered office, when Joe Biden entered office, we had reporting around this at the time that they really kind of wanted to move past Trump. They were trying to avoid a confrontation with Trump in terms of his legal culpability for a variety of things, including January 6th. And that just proved to be, I think, unavoidable, thanks in large part to the January 6th committee and the hearings last year and the public controversy or attention that those drew. And so, I think the notion that the DOJ has been weaponized is just, these are talking points. And I have to point out that this theme on the part of Republicans, they first started to develop it last August, the day that Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago was searched by the FBI at a point in time when none of us, except for the Justice Department and Trump, had any idea what was in there, what the case was about, or what they were going to find. So I think that's very telling. And that, the notion that there would be a weaponization committee in Congress, for instance, was something that Republicans were planning late last year. So they've been laying the groundwork for this. But I think this sort of theme or argument, if you will, has almost no relation to the actual facts.
OK, well, there are 4 charges on the slate, including conspiracy to defraud the United States and conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, namely his attempt to stop the counting of the vote. Mark Williams, you're a Republican. Do you believe the 2020 election was stolen?
I don't, but there are Republicans out there that believe there were some nefarious things that went on in and around the election, and I think the president had some advisors in his ears that were incorrect in telling that, and that kind of gets us to where we're at right now.
So, is it conceivable that he didn't know he'd lost?
I mean, look, that's. I don't know. I can't speak to what the president knew or didn't know at the time. I just know kind of the verbiage that he was using, and so, I think it's going to be incredibly hard to prove conspiracy. I think over the course of history,
really,
it's been
there was demonstrable evidence that he'd lost. There were 60 court cases. There were 11 senior figures in the administration, legal counsel telling me he'd lost. I guess the only defense is that he truly believed it was stolen, despite all the evidence he was provided with.
Right. I just don't know how you get to that in a court of law at the end of the day. I just don't know how you prove what he believed or what he didn't believe.
So how does he defend this? Because some are speculating that he has to plead ignorance or stupidity, and there are many who think his pride will prevent him from doing that.
I mean, I think you've seen several folks try and start to lay out one of the pillars of that defense, right? And so I think at the end of the day, you're going to see that kind of progress over time. Again, I think this is going to be, conspiracy charges are going to be really, really hard to get to in a court of law. They're one of the hardest ones to ever prove.
Alex Holder, you were invited to be around the president and his family in the days after the election. You gave evidence to the January 6th committee under subpoena. Did you ever get a hint that he knew at that moment that he'd lost?
So I think there's a few things to bear in mind. I mean, Donald Trump had set up the idea of the election being fraudulent well before the election even took place. I mean, he was talking about how mail-in ballots were all fraudulent. So this idea had already started. And in fact, it even started earlier than that, even when he was against Hillary Clinton, when he didn't accept, or he wouldn't accept that he would accept the results of the election if she had won. I mean, Trump believes that he is always going to win. He has this inability to accept loss. So when you're around him, he convinces all those around him and himself in these ludicrous ideas. I mean, there's not a single shred of evidence to support any of the claims that he made throughout the entire time that he was and is still making these ridiculous allegations. So, I mean, his own attorney general, a few days before I met him in December, said there was no evidence whatsoever to support his position. And then with him after January 6th in Mar-a-Lago and again in Bedminster, he just continued to maintain this position constantly. And I think it's because Trump's character is one that he, all the way through his life, he's never been able to accept that he lost or that he was defeated. And so it will be interesting to see him pleading that he's actually insane, which I doubt he'll do. And I think it is pretty straightforward to prove. But
you told the committee that when you went in to do the interviews, you couldn't imagine